Hello, true believers. This is Doc Hogg, and welcome to episode 99 of Comics and Variety. If you like this channel, please do subscribe. Hit the notification bell to be notified when I post new videos. And for the sake of YouTube's search algorithm, please do hit the like button. Okay, a couple of administrative details before I get to the review of Marvel's X. First, I want to talk to you about the logic behind my comic book tilt. Alrighty. Here is the major premise. This is the kind of person who would not like the comic book tilt. Minor premise. You are not this person. Conclusion. Therefore, you should sign up for my comic book tilt. The link to the sign up page is in the description below. Alrighty, next up is a new comic book that I'm backing called Wordsmith, Volume 1 and 2, a steampunk fantasy. It is written by Stephen Koch and has about 11 days left on its Indiegogo campaign, so be sure to back it soon. I'm going to be talking more about this comic book and why I'm backing it after my review of Marvel's X. Suffice to say for now that the art looks great and the story idea is very interesting. I'll provide a link to the Indiegogo campaign in the description below. Alrighty, moving on to Marvel's X. In my review of Marvel's X issue 1, I put it on the don't buy list, but I did say that it had potential, and because of that I decided to pick up issue 2. And I'm now putting Marvel's X on the wait and see list, which of course means, buy it at your own risk. And maybe it's close to being on the to buy list. The reason is that the story has suddenly come into focus and it's actually quite interesting. So why am I not putting Marvel's X on the buy list? Well, it's the art. I'm not liking it. And that's something I'm going to briefly discuss a little later, whether a comic book, whether we should consider it to be a bad comic book if the art sucks even when the story is good. Now, Marvel's X is based on the premise that there is a virus tearing through the human race that is giving everyone superpowers. And of course, a lot of people aren't using those powers for, good, noble purposes. The protagonist, David, is a young kid who is one of the rare humans who seems to be immune to the virus. And when we left off in issue 1, he had been rescued from some thugs by a trucker who takes David in. And we see some fire on the trucker's glasses here, and that was a pretty good cliffhanger. Now, it turns out the trucker is actually Ghost Rider, and in the beginning of issue 2, their truck gets attacked, Ghost Rider fights them, he reveals himself. David runs away. He's scared of Ghost Rider because he doesn't know who Ghost Rider is, and hey, if you saw a guy with a flaming skull, you'd probably run too. Anyway, David is now vulnerable again, and this time at the bequest of Daredevil, Spider-Man rescues David. And this is where the plot really starts to get interesting. It turns out that David may be the only human that is immune to the virus. Daredevil tells Spider-Man that Reed Richards thinks David might be the key to a cure, so that's why he needs to be protected. Daredevil also reveals that some creature, presumably a human who has been infected with the virus, is out to get David, which presumably sets up the conflict later on. And the comic doesn't really show much of the creature at this point. It leaves it to the imagination, which is often very effective because the reader will often imagine something scarier and more sinister than the artist can actually draw. But, David may be the key to the cure. There's some creature after him. Now the plot is really thickened. So good plot going forward, lots of potential, but there are problems with this comic. First, why is David afraid of Ghost Rider? More specifically, why does he not know who Ghost Rider is? One of the premises of this comic is that David is big into superheroes. He's really into comic book characters. He wears a Green Goblin mask as a disguise, for example. In issue 1, that's in fact how we meet him. He's playing with action figures. He's that absorbed in comics, and he has no clue who Ghost Rider is. That's a hole in the story's logic. As I said in my review of issue 1, David looks like he's about 12, maybe a little older, and he's still openly playing with action figures. It's kind of like...
Oh, Princess Vespa, at last I have you in my clutches to have my way with you, the way I want to. No, no, please leave me alone. No, you are mine. Now you are going to die. Psst. Oh, oh.
Yeah, a little bit creepy. Here's something else that's creepy. When Spider-Man rescues David, David climbs on Spider-Man's back as they get away. Here is how the artist rendered that.
Things that make you go,
Is that creepy or maybe funny? Probably some of both. And here is my biggest criticism of this comic, and it is the art. And I was critical of the art in my review of issue 1, and I wasn't entirely certain why I didn't like it, but I think I figured it out. And the problem here is the art often looks almost two-dimensional. Take a look, for example, at David's fingers here. This was something that I saw in the previous comic. It's here again. His fingers look square, and it almost kind of ruins the art. It almost looks two-dimensional. It almost ruins the effect of the shadow behind it, which is supposed to give it some depth. It doesn't, it almost doesn't look three-dimensional. Look at this monster here. He looks, just very kind of square, and behind him there's really no background. There's nothing smaller in the background that makes him, gives him some depth. Again, it just looks very, very two-dimensional, and it's very important that comic book art look three-dimensional. So that leads to my question. If the art is terrible, but the story is good, does that mean that we should consider the comic book to be good, or should we consider it to be bad? Now, granted, I understand that some of this is subjective. I mean, some people are going to look at this art and be fine with it. But, nevertheless, I think there are some very general, almost absolute, maybe not quite absolute, standards when it comes to comic book art. I mean, one of the things I've talked about before is that comic book art needs to have a lot of movement. The reason is that the medium here doesn't move, unlike, say, a motion picture. All right, so it's very important that that the images look like they're moving. I think it's the same with the images needing to look three-dimensional. Why? Because the medium here is obviously very two-dimensional. All right, maybe those aren't universal standards, but I think they're pretty close. And if you aren't meeting those, then you've got bad art. And yeah, I think if the art is bad enough, it doesn't really matter how good the story is. I mean, the story has to be absolutely terrific before it can overcome some really bad art. But otherwise, I mean, bad art, yeah, you consider the comic book bad, in particular because people look at the art and they start paying attention to the bad art, and then they're not paying attention to the story, and they may not even bother finishing the comic book if they hate it so much, and they're not thinking about the story. So yeah, it becomes a bad comic book for the reader. Well, I wanted to see what other people thought about this, so I threw the question out on Twitter, this question: say a comic has a good plot but lousy art. Is it still a good comic, or can the quality of the art, or lack thereof, outweigh the quality of the plot? And here are some of the answers that I received. Here's John from Beyond. For me, in general, a good comic needs both a well-conceived and well-written story accompanied by good art. With that said, on occasion I have indulged in comics with strong stories and subpar art. But it's like having my favorite cereal without milk. I enjoy the dry cereal, but it's not as satisfying without the milk. And, again, it would also kind of depend on the cereal, right? If it's oatmeal squares, hey, yeah. But if it's just bran flakes, having bran flakes without the milk is like... And then Jeff gave this reply: a good story is important, but so is the art. There are comics you grab every week, but if you want to grab new people, you need good cover art. It's a visual medium. The good story will keep them. It's like porn with all ugly people. So I think it's 55% art and 45% story. But, again, there's a little bit of subjectivity. I mean, hey, some people are into porn with ugly people.
Things that make you go, "Ugh."
So what do you think? Maybe you think that the art is so important that the story barely matters at all, or maybe you don't care that much about the art. The story makes a much bigger difference, or something in between. But please do tell me what you think in the comments section below. I'll be very interested to read them. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, bad art can ruin a good story in a comic book. And that's why I'm leaving Marvel's X on the wait and see list. While the art here is not absolutely horrendous, it's not that good. And to kind of make up for that, the story is really going to have to develop into something very interesting, very engaging. So again, that's why I'm leaving this on the wait and see list for now. Alrighty, moving on to Wordsmith Volumes 1 and 2, a steampunk fantasy. On the off chance you don't know, steampunk is a genre of science fiction that has a historical setting and typically has steam-powered machinery rather than advanced technology. If you ever saw the Will Smith movie Wild Wild West, yes, I know the movie was based on a TV show. Anyways, that's kind of steampunk. Anyway, one reason I'm backing this comic book is the art. Just loads of great detail, very nice coloring. I should mention the artist and the colorist here, who are P.R. Daedalus and Peyton Freeman, respectively. The art alone is almost worth the price. But the story idea here is really good, too. In a nutshell, words come to life in this comic, and we aren't necessarily talking about words like guns and knives. We're talking about words like brave and fear. And that is really intriguing. You want to see what the writer, Stephen Koch, does with that. Here is a summary from the description on the Indiegogo page. A skilled artisan, whose name is Victoria, can craft words to evoke feelings and emotions from its recipients, although not all words mean the same thing to everyone. Stephen described Volume 1 to me as, when a word that Victoria crafts goes awry, can she fix it, or will she end up making matters worse? And the summary of Volume 2 is, Victoria is the best wordsmith in the city. However, a challenger from the eastern nations might steal Victoria's title. There's adventure, excitement, and, of course, lots of words. So, overall, it just looks like a great indie comic. Be sure to back it. And again, the link to the Indiegogo campaign, the link to its page is in the description below. Okay, that's all for now. Have a very nice day.